Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the Talking City podcast, brought to you by the Manchester Evening News. My name is Dan Murphy, and joining me today, as ever, is Mr. Simon Bajkowski. Si, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Dan. How are you?
I'm all right. I know the rain has finally stopped just in time for the cricket. It's not only the cricket that the rain destroyed, but also my roof, because there's a big leak in my bedroom, which is why the bed is out behind me. I had to go on the spare bed today because there's water peeing in through my ceiling. All the upstairs lights don't work. The dog, the newly adopted dog, keeps dropping excrement around the house to an annoying degree.
But other than that, all good, yeah?
Otherwise, not so bad. Going away tomorrow. But yeah, and also, as we were just saying there, the cricket, we talked about the cricket at the start of the last podcast. We do actually have football to talk about today for a nice change of pace, but I think it would be egregious of us not to talk about that. The disappointment of the Ashes, bloody Manchester, costing the world again, eh?
Yeah, it was a shame after some very good cricket, but kind of, I don't know, I got annoyed by everyone being like, oh, it always rains in Manchester. But also you kind of just think England have only got themselves to blame. I know all this talk about, oh, maybe we should play until 10. And I do think some of the start times yesterday were daft, but, they had it in their position to win the first test and they didn't. And they had it in their position to win the second test and they didn't. So... yeah, a bit of a shame. I don't know if I mentioned it last week, but I was absolutely encaptured by the women's Ashes as well. That was a fantastic series that I absolutely ate up every second of that properly. So, and that was, a bit of a contentious draw as well. Yeah, good cricket, and also very nice to see Manchester City back in action.
Yeah, absolutely. They, of course, the Blues took to the field down in Japan on Sunday. It was a Sunday morning for us all over in Manchester, about 8 o'clock in the evening for those in Japan. And it was a really kind of good game in the end, given there was two different teams for each half. We'll take the first half kind of first in the first section of the podcast. But in general, a 5-3 win for City, in which they were really ran through the paces, went 2 goals down, as we'll touch on. But as a friendly test, it couldn't have been much better for City to really gauge where they are fitness-wise, to play a team who, are 21 games into their season, as fit as they're going to be, I'd say in the middle of their campaign. We're coming into this game not like City, just coming back off the summer holidays. Jack Grealish did well to even move, let alone play football in that heat for 45 minutes, given the partying he's been up to over the summer, and God bless him, because he certainly deserved it. And then, of course, a team who, unlike City's current opponents, who are obviously better teams on paper, Yokohama Marinos are a team who really wanted to beat City. They were a team who wanted to show what they could do. It meant something to them. Of course, a sister club of Manchester City and the City Football Group. They wanted to show what they can do in Kevin Muscat. They've got a good manager who looks to be going places, and they gave City a hell of a game that, in fairness to the Blues, they did really well to come away with a winning.
Yeah, it's one of those where sort of no one really minds results, but it's more about performances. I saw one headline saying City had suffered a major embarrassment going 2-0 down, and it sort of like, well, they did win 5-3. But yeah, there was plenty of rustiness, and like you say, it's Yokohama kind of the weakest team on paper, but are also the ones that are used to playing week in, week out. Whereas, Bayern Munich have had a rest and Atletico have had a rest, just as City have had a rest. So, yeah, it will have been important for City to kind of get those muscles pumping again. And it's quite a hard test to do it against a team that's much, much fitter than you are. So, yeah, there was plenty really to go at. I think City are obviously a team that likes to keep the ball, so they don't often do as much running as other teams. But when they don't have the ball, their runs are more intense than any other side. So getting that pressing game working, which they did, will have had quite a few of them blowing quite hard. And plenty, it was just as ever with pre-season, lots of kind of interesting things. Some things might become more relevant, some things might become less relevant, but it looked like City conceded some pretty ropey goals in a way that you don't normally see when everyone's match fit. So there wasn't too much that you looked at and thought, oh, that's a worry. It was more kind of, oh, that's the first game back.
Well, exactly. That's what I wanted to kind of delve straight into. As you say, there was quite a few interesting bits, and given it was nearly two completely different teams for each half, we will stick, each half into each part of the podcast. So with the first half, of course, City go 2 goals down. It was quite a sluggish and sloppy start, I think it's fair to say. I think Yokohama really kind of took the game to City. They got a lot of pace in that forward line on the first goal scorer, Anderson Lopez, beg your pardon, got the opener. He was rapid. Elba, the winger, was really fast. And the way they moved the ball up the pitch, they were getting from their own box to City's box within 3 or 4 passes. It was really impressive. And, they were taking advantage of, slight sloppiness from City. And as you say, all 3 goals were kind of mistakes from City. And the first 2, as you say, I think the headlines of utter embarrassment are a bit far-fetched, but the manner of the goals they conceded in the first half were a little bit, bloody hell, I didn't think they'd be quite this rusty. I know they've all had their holidays and they're coming back off, the greatest achievement they may ever achieve after a treble, but I did not expect them, the treble winners to come back and then be conceding, getting cut open, and a player going through 40 yards from goal and sticking it in the back of the net, a right back no less, and then it was Stefan Ortega in net rather than first choice Ederson, and he didn't have the best afternoon. The first goal for Anderson Lopez coming when he parried a fairly tame shot back into the middle of the box, and Lopez was able to gather it back up and stick it in the corner. But Manuel Akanji had also got turned in the build-up. So yeah, those first 2 goals, I'm sure there will be the eye kinks that will get ironed out before too long, but I don't think Guardiola had been best pleased watching it, put it that way.
No, I think what you saw in the first half was how important the midfield is to City, and the midfield 3 was Kalvin Phillips, Mateo Kovacic, and James Mcatee, and you will note that none of those played last season in the big games for City, so it was kind of very much a work in progress, and City didn't have that kind of control of the game that they usually have and that they had in the second half when Rodri came on and looked like the player that he is, which is a step above Phillips. Phillips obviously kind of determined to prove himself and stay at City. He didn't really have the best half. It seems kind of a bit unfair to pick on him too much for being rusty when others are rusty as well, but kind of it just showed with how good Rodri looked, the standard that he still has to aspire to.
No, absolutely. Kalvin Phillips was going to be my second kind of point there. Like, you're right, he didn't have the best half whatsoever. It was a few sloppy passes. I remember one point, kind of a ball was rolled to him and he let it kind of go under his foot to the opposition player. A few, you can understand 1 or 2, and as you say, everyone's rusty, everyone's entitled to make mistakes in pre-season, but more from his perspective, he's kind of quite bravely and admirably said, I'm not going anywhere, I've only been here a year, why would I leave? I want to prove my place, I know I'm good enough to play. I had injuries and whatnot, I've got to play catch up, but I know I'm good enough, and you can only respect someone for backing themselves like that. But when when you have the big talk, you kind of have the walk, and he's been given a chance. It's only pre-season. I'm sure there'll have more chances to come in the 3 games of pre-season yet. But it wasn't a promising start to this kind of revitalisation of his time at City, until, of course, he did make the second goal, which we'll come on to in a moment. So there was at least one positive from his display. Yeah,
and I think it was a sort of long crossfield ball from him that kind of got the ball moving for the first. And, it's hard for him because he isn't Rodri, and he wants to play in the same position that Rodri is or does. But what we saw from him, like pressing up high for the second goal, you wouldn't find Rodri doing necessarily. And that, it could be, get back to where you should be and let someone else do that pressing. But maybe that is a sign of how, Phillips wants to play in the team, or the role that he's been told to do to fit to his style. So I kind of think in this we naturally say, oh well, he's not at Rodri's level. But even if he gets to the best version that he can be, he won't play exactly as Rodri will. So there will be things that Rodri does that he doesn't. But at the same time, maybe there can be things that he does that Rodri doesn't. So it's about finding that balance. But fundamentally, in that role, it's about kind of not giving the ball away in bad areas as often as he did.
I know Guardiola wants Phillips to be the backup for Rodri, and I think even by September last season he was kind of bemoaning how much he was having to play Rodri because Phillips had picked up that elbow injury, shoulder, whichever it was, in Barcelona. Yeah, shoulder. So even by September, early October, he was already frustrated with how much he had to play Rodri, and Rodri basically played every single game he was available for in the end because he didn't trust Phillips by that point. So I know he wants him to play in that holding role and help Rodri out when needed, but is his future maybe not in a more advanced role where the cost of losing the ball isn't quite as high? And as you say, you can do we've seen him do it for England, we've seen him do it for Leeds, where he can be quite effective in those forward areas. He can make good forward passes, and he has a good energy. He can do the press. I wonder if there is a future for him at City, if it is in a more kind of advanced role. But then obviously you've got the new Debicent Kovacic who will come to, De Bruyne, Bernardo, Foden, hopefully Alvarez. So there's competition there for him as well. So it's hard to see him. It's hard to see him ever becoming a regular, really.
Yeah, it is. I think the kind of double pivot that City have now with John Stones stepping up and beyond that is a way in which there are kind of more opportunities for Phillips to play than there maybe were when he joined, and it was just, can you play instead of Rodri? But like you say, it's difficult to see how he will oust any of those players from the team. All he can do, which is all any player can do in that situation, is make the most of his opportunities. I don't think anyone at this stage last summer would have thought that Grealish would basically keep Foden out the team for the entire second half of the season, but he did with his level of performance. So the opportunity is there for Phillips if he can take it. As far as I watched the game, he would need to do better than he did against Yokohama, but maybe others who have more influence on team selection at Manchester City saw enough in the good that he did to still be positive about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot can change over a season, but one thing that hasn't changed over pre-season is that John Stones remains absolutely class. He was again doing the inverted midfield role, doing it from centre back for the first half, which could have interesting going forward if Gvardiol finally arrives or not. But he was the one who got the ball rolling for City with a fine finish. As you say, Phillips was involved in the goal. It was his crossfield pass to Grealish, Grealish then passed it over to Cole Palmer, who teed it for Alvarez, who laid it off for Stones to sweep into the top corner. It was a lovely goal, and you get the feeling we kind of might see a bit more of Stones being a real presence in the attacking areas next season when he's got a full, he's already got 6 months or so in the midfield role. It seems like it's going to continue next season. It could change it on a moment's notice, of course. But if he continues in that midfield, it looks like we'll see him having a much bigger influence going forward next year. And he's good at
it. Yeah. We sort of are still surprised by it, but I think Stones himself is a bit surprised still by it all. But I think the surprise is that, a few years ago when he was tried a bit further up in like a holding midfield role, it was like every touch he had, he looked a bit like a fish out of water. He kept sort of like glancing over his shoulder to check who was behind him because he was a bit further forward and he didn't know. And, every run kind of looked like, when a centre-back finds themselves too far up the pitch and they're sort of like, what's gone on? How have I ended up here?
Slowest step overs in memory of man.
Yeah, I need to get back to the edge of the box immediately. Whereas now Stones just seems to have the run of the pitch and just kind of, just strolls anywhere he wants and picks up the ball sometimes, gives it off, fires in a half volley without even sort of thinking about it. You saw it in the Champions League final when he just kind of bossed the game, popping up everywhere. And yeah, there's more evidence that will continue. And the big thing that City struggled with last season was to sort of provide enough runners into the box to help Haaland and give City enough attacking options. And I don't think anyone thought Stones would be one of those, but he's showing signs that he could be another one. And generally speaking, the more kind of fluid Guardiola's teams can be, the better they play. And Stones kind of has the potential to be more fluid than anyone else.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, as we said, the equaliser was scored by Alvarez, tapping in after Phillips had won the ball off the goalkeeper. And interesting starter, two youngsters who we talked a lot about, see how they'll do this year. Cole Palmer and James Mcatee. Mcatee especially interesting, given, as we talked about last week, he is in the team. City have kind of rejected interest in him. There's hope that he could make a real impact this year, and there remains interest in Palmer, of course. How do you think the pair do? For me, Mcatee looked a little over-eager, a little overexcited, made a few rash tackles. If it wasn't a friendly, probably would have been booked. I know a couple of times the Yokohama players weren't best pleased with him when he made some late challenges. Didn't really, as you say, the midfield's so important, and if you're not playing with Rodri and it's an experimental midfield, you might be a bit hamstrung. It might be interesting to see how we do with Rodri in there with him, or De Bruyne or Foden, etc. But on the other hand, Palmer, I was really impressed with. I thought he continued his fine form from the Euros, and if he's stepping up his game, maybe he will stay after all.
Yeah, Mcatee, I like the look of as a player, and I quite liked what I saw from him. There was kind of that nice cross that Nathan Ake headed onto the bar, I think, sort of shortly before City got their second. And a few, promising runs. It's kind of harder for Mcatee to impress in that central midfield because it is a more demanding role. How good is Phil Foden, and Guardiola still hasn't really kind of moved him there. So it is difficult, but I think that is pretty much where City see Mcatee in the team rather than kind of out wide. So he's going to have to learn that role pretty quickly if he wants to thrive in it. And yeah, I thought we were talking about sort of fitness earlier, and Palmer looked one of the fittest in the team, with obviously those kind of minutes under his belt from England. And fair play to him for saying that he wanted to be on the tour and didn't want kind of the holiday that I'm sure he could have had after being with England for kind of so long into his summer, with them going all the way in the Euros. So yeah, I mean, Mahrez going has kind of opened up that right wing spot a bit more, and that is Palmer's kind of favourite position. And to say he wasn't great last season when he played, a lot of the time when he played with Mahrez, who is one of the least flexible, or was one of the least flexible players in the team, because he just played right wing and that was it. Palmer can play centrally or left, but the position that he enjoys the most is right wing. So it's a really interesting time for him to see if he can kick on and show to Guardiola that, yeah, he can. It's worth keeping him around.
Absolutely. It's very interesting about Mahrez, because I don't think we have actually managed to talk about him leaving, have we? I don't think we talked about him last week, at least not since it definitely happened.
No.
It's an interesting departure then, because does City stick or twist? We'll talk about Oscar Bob later. He did very well in the position as well. Palmer, they've got players there who can do it. Bernardo, of course, if he does stay as well. Do they need another wide forward? And a word for Mahrez, who I don't think was ever quite appreciated for how good he was in that team and how really well he fitted, and the goals he contributed so many times. Top goal scorer 2 seasons ago with 24, and even though Haaland kind of overshadowed him on that front last year, he still contributed I want to say it was like 15 goals and 17 assists or something. He was still a really key player, and it's almost a shame he didn't get on in either of the FA Cup or Champions League final because, for 5 years was he at City, and he was a really, really good player in that time.
Yeah, and a hat-trick in the FA Cup semi.
Of course, yeah.
Kind of made his reputation at City for scoring big goals in important games. I think when they made their way to the Champions League final in 2021, he scored kind of a lot of important goals, and then was kind of City's best player between January and March this year. So
that Chelsea game, I remember. Then him and Grealish came on, and they combined for the winner.
Yeah. He was a really special player in that first touch. I mean, oh my word! It's like every time you saw it, he's just like, how has he trapped the ball so well? And yeah, I think, like I say, he wasn't kind of the most flexible City player. Everyone knew kind of what he could do and what he couldn't do, and that kind of cost him or went against him in the final months of the season when Bernardo was backed on that right wing because he could press a lot better. But yeah, I think I saw something like only 2 players his age or older have gone for higher transfer fees, so that kind of shows what
Lewandowski and Ronaldo.
Well, yeah, so that's not bad company to be in, and yeah, he always had an army of support from Algeria, and such a talent for African footballers as well. So yeah, I think his contribution for City, but kind of for everyone he represented will have been huge. And there was that season at Leicester as well when he won the league and played so well. So he's won a hell of a lot, and the big game player that he is has contributed towards winning so much as well. So yeah, it's I think City will look and see how best to replace him, and I don't think replacing him is as essential as, say, replacing Bernardo Silva would be if he left, just because he can play in more positions, but you will lose that leadership and that kind of mentality, and a player who can win you big games and decide them on his own. So yeah, it's a loss for City, even if it is a decent amount of money to get for him.
Absolutely, it almost seems a bit of like an end of kind of one era of Guardiola team, which is interesting because we've never really had that before in his career. It's only ever been 3 or 4 seasons, whereas now into his 6th at City, it's like we're getting new eras, and we've Gundogan gone and Mahrez gone. Really kind of seen a new team, and a part of that new team, of course, is new players. In the first half, a debut for Mateo Kovacic. How do you think he fit in doing that kind of Gundogan position on the left? There was one passage of play that I think led to a chance for Parma, City's first proper chance on target, where he was kind of hounded in around the halfway line, and he very elegantly kind of dribbled his way out of it before passing the ball on. I think it was fair to say it was like kind of a rusty display, as it was for everyone in that first half. Not the best tempo, but he really showed a couple of flashes of why he's been signed to basically do the Gundogan job.
Yeah, I think so. It was interesting listening to David James speak about him, and sort of saying that he isn't really what anything like City have had before, for his kind of ability to bring the ball in possession through the lines rather than simply passing it. Again, I don't think he will do what Gundogan does, and to kind of judge him against what Gundogan does, he might always come up short, but he will have his own things that he's very handy at and can do things that maybe Gundogan couldn't. So it's interesting. It's kind of like, if Bernardo Silva stays and the noise around him leaving isn't kind of getting any louder, it would be tempting to think that the City midfield could look very, very similar, like we saw in the second half against Yokohama. You have Rodri and you have Bernardo Silva and you have it was Foden, but say De Bruyne. It looks like, a midfield we've all seen before, but you add in, say, Kovacic and Foden and Mcatee even, maybe Phillips, and it looks very, very different. So I think kind of that will be one of the big talking points this season, to see how the midfield evolves and whether those kind of newer players to those roles sort of adapt to what we've seen before, or whether they bring something new, and whether that is good or bad or a bit of both.
Well, that's 2-2 at the break. We'll be back in just a minute to go through the second half. Do not go anywhere. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Talking City podcast. As we stand, it's 2-2 after the first half, and there has been 10 outfield changes. Only Stefan Ortega remains on the pitch from the first half in goal. Otherwise, it's wholesale changes, and these changes side, they really up the tempo. We've talked a bit about Rodri already, but I think his presence just immediately makes City better, more anchored, more just capable on the ball. And, it wasn't just him, it was Foden, it was Bernardo, it was João Cancelo, who we'll talk about very soon. And of course, it was Erling Haaland. Within 6 minutes on the pitch and 3 touches of the ball, he had put City ahead with a lovely thing. It was actually a Foden through ball into him. He trapped the ball, he turned, and then he shot across the keeper into the far corner. You can immediately sense within 5 minutes at the tempo of this. I think they'd had 2 or 3 chances before they'd even scored here within 6 minutes. This is obviously it was a stronger of the 2 11s, and it was the fast. I don't know how they must all be at similar fitness levels, but this 11 maybe just got a bit of a rollicking off the manager to this isn't just a friendly. You've got to go and play well, and they went out and they did play really well. The tempo was good, the passing was sharper, and the chances were coming a lot more quickly. And 3 minutes, Haaland back to doing what he does best, and you just get the sense that he's now well rested. He's had no injury issues for a few weeks now, had loads of time to recover. That the Premier League might not quite be ready for how many goals he will score once again, because there's a record there to be broken, and you wouldn't bet against him not doing so.
I think Guardiola said after the game that he's in much better shape than he was at this time last season, and he arrived from Dortmund injured basically, and didn't train when City started training for pre-season, and didn't play in the first game, and had to be looked after basically through the whole season. But now he's kind of had 12 months without getting seriously injured or injuries that you'd worry about. So he's got that kind of base fitness, and looked very, very sharp. I certainly don't think there will be anyone kind of making those same mistakes if he doesn't score in the Community Shield again like he did last year. And I know there was a bit of chat towards the end of last season about him not scoring goals, but he just kind of showed that he will score goals, because that's what he does. I think Guardiola said of Aguero before, he'll be scoring goals when he's 70, 80 years old in the park. That's just with him for his whole life. But it looks like he'll score plenty. And yeah, it was, City scored 2 just before half time, and then you thought, half time's come at a good time for Yokohama, but then City kind of unleashed their second team, and it was interesting because Bernardo Silva went off after 75 minutes, having only come on after 45, and with his future still uncertain, you sort of like, what's going on there? But again, Guardiola asked about it after the game and said, well, he'd mastered the conditions and he was fully up to speed with everything, so I thought I'd give someone else a try. So it's like, as plenty of them in the squad are understandably still looking for their fitness, Bernardo's clearly found his, which is another positive sign for City going into the season, as long as they can keep hold of him.
Yeah, definitely. Maximo Peroni came on, looked decent. I think he had one lovely 1-2 at one point, and was unfortunate not to have anyone in the box for him to kind of set up. He looked quite sharp, and I think he's looked all good in his cameos. But as you say, Foden with the assist for Haaland, playing in that midfield role, it does feel like this is the time Foden this year coming is going to be when Foden finally gets his central role, and you get the impression that Foden and Haaland's going to be a duo, but singing the praises off fairly often in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I think so. But also kind of, if you're looking for who's going to replace Mahrez on that right wing, and you sort of think back to last season, and that front three of Foden, Grealish and Haaland was very, very good. So, I think, he's a bit like Bernardo Foden, isn't he, in that he's almost too talented and versatile for his own good. He gets shipped about to wherever the team needs, but obviously he's always hankered for a bit of a return to the middle, and that is kind of where Pep has seen his long-term future. So I think with Gundogan going, I think Foden is probably the one who can replicate that relationship with Haaland better than anyone else that those two had together, because I don't think it was really a surprise that maybe Gundogan's best season for City came with Haaland. And it's just going to be nice for City to have a fully fit Foden from the start, because he had his injury issues at the start of last year and then later in the season that sort of didn't help him to get back in the team. But it was telling that Guardiola called for him when De Bruyne went down in Istanbul, and he played very well that night in the middle. And we sort of said it so often, but he's got so much talent that you think surely this is the year where he really takes his game to the next level.
Yeah, 100%. And another player who's clearly got loads of talent and showed it on the pitch down in Tokyo was João Cancelo. He came back. He's back from Bayern Munich. His loan spell, he's still not gone. Was kind of expected to leave at some point after the sudden kind of deterioration of his relationship. I say that 3 times quick with Pep Guardiola at the start of the year. But he comes on. He interestingly comes on at right back rather than left back. It's Rico Lewis who's moved to the left, and he does really, really good. I thought he looked so sharp. He had a couple of nutmegs. He was good coming forward. And, of course, he set up the 5th goal in the last seconds. A lovely pass across the face of goal for Haaland to tap in at the back post. Walker started the first half and captained the team. And obviously there still remains uncertainty around his future. It does seem if one of the two are closer to leaving, it would be Walker, with the Bayern Munich links ever loud. And obviously they play each other on Wednesday, which could certainly have some interesting quotes come out of that at some point with the press conferences on Tuesday. If Walker does leave, does Cancelo stay at right back? Like, we know his downfall was so strange and so quick, and he could leave at any moment. You never know, given if a bid comes in. But only a year ago, if not even 6 months ago, he was the best fullback in the Premier League, and it's like, surely he can get back to that level. And I thought it was a promising sign here, and I don't think it'd be bad if they kept Cancelo, put it that way. Yeah,
it's about a year since he got given the number 7 shirt. And everyone thought that would be the most kind of outrageous thing about Cancelo for the year, but it quickly went downhill. Yeah, it was strange because on the sort of City feed of the game and around the game, there were so many positive tweets about Cancelo, and they're not going to be picking out negative tweets necessarily, but it was interesting how many were about Cancelo. I thought he kind of showed in part why Guardiola was happy to let him go. There was obviously all the personal stuff, but as fun as a nutmeg can be, it's not the best way of keeping possession or finding a teammate. It was a bit cavalier, the sort of loose stuff that City kind of cut out in the second half of the season. However, there was a lot of good stuff, and the assists for Haaland was very good, and it was a committed performance. You're talking about a guy who's very much on the outskirts of the squad at the minute, and isn't seen as someone who they're counting on for the new season, and a player who, when things aren't going his way and when he's in those kind of positions, he's not renowned for kind of buckling down and keeping his head down and just putting in hard work, but that is what he did on the night. He got 45 minutes and he looked decent enough for, like I say, many fans to be saying maybe he could have a role to play. And Walker is interesting because, Walker looks the closest to being out the door, and with Bayern playing them in a few days, it could be very interesting to see what happens with that. We could have a Leroy Sané repeat from a few years ago when everyone in Munich was convinced that Sané wouldn't play the Community Shield, and everyone in Manchester was convinced that he would, and then he did, and did his cruciate ligaments, and that was his season over, unfortunately. But also Bayern Munich's transfer interest over. So yeah, and with a reporter from a German paper sort of
took the words out my mouth.
Embarrass the Tottenham manager.
Will someone rock up with a Walker top in Guardiola's press conference? I honestly would love to see it. I'd love to see what his reaction would be.
I think he might have a response planned for that. He's that kind of guy, isn't he? So but we know, because Bayern Munich. Obviously, it wasn't Bayern Munich who did the stunt, but the whole kind of aura around Bayern is can be kind of abrasive for English clubs to deal with, and City certainly didn't appreciate how Bayern went about trying to sign Leroy Sané by basically talking it was a done deal until it wasn't, and things like that. So it will be interesting to see. But also, if Walker does leave, then yeah, Cancelo is the only real senior fullback. And one of the only fullbacks, because you've only really got Rico Lewis and Sergio Gomez, if you can still count him as a fullback, and not someone kind of further up the pitch. So they are short on bodies, but at the same time, it's just so difficult to see that Cancelo's got a way back into the squad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's where I was going to go next. Obviously, the other fullbacks who played, Sergio Gomez and Rico Lewis, on the same flank. Gomez, coming off the back of a really impressive under-21 Euros, was kind of played on his favoured wing, with left wing position. He got into some good positions. His crossing not the best. I don't think he beat his first man on many occasions, but he kind of got into good positions, and if he's playing in a position that's more suited to him and he can be used there, as we just said, there's a position out wide that's open. Grealish back up, you never know. You could see a way for him into the team there. But Rico Lewis at left back was interesting because he was still the one who was trusted to do the centre midfield job coming in from left back. So, and he looked really, up until it was his kind of mistake that led to the third goal, where he kind of had a miscommunication with Ortega, nudged the ball out of the goalkeeper's path for the striker to tap in. Apart from that, he had another solid game, and we actually haven't seen much of Lewis in the last few months of the season because he kind of lost his place to Stones being absolutely incredible. So it's nice to see that his progress hasn't faltered much in those weeks out of the spotlight.
Yeah, there was that mix-up for the third goal, but I think it was solid enough, and I think we will see lots of Lewis this season. He can play on either flank and obviously move forward into that midfield role at will. He's been played as a number 8 by Guardiola as well, so he's kind of almost like John Stones' deputy. And there are plenty of games that City will have to manoeuvre and manage, and Lewis is certainly a player that everyone in the first team now fully respects as a first team player, and wouldn't have any doubts about giving him the ball or anything like that. So yeah, I think it's it all happened very fast at the time, but Lewis is firmly a first team player now that will be expected to play a lot next season.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll see more of him. And another young player we might see a bit more of is Oscar Bob, in pre-season at least. He came in on the right flank, and he also had a really solid showing on that flank. He made some good link-up play with Bernardo, and Cancelo was involved in that fifth goal. The fourth goal, by the way, a Rodri rocket, of course, doing what he suddenly does best by blasting him in from the edge of the box, repeating his Champions League exploits. But yeah, Oscar Bob, he's really highly rated. You talked him up quite a lot on the last podcast we did, and he didn't disappoint, even though, interestingly enough, he wasn't happy with his own display when asked about it afterwards. He basically said, I don't think I played well today, which was quite, I can't wait to see what he does if he does play well in his own head, because I thought he did quite well. It's
exactly the mentality that you want, though, isn't it? You think that they've played well, but the standards they set, they're not happy with it. He's had to wait for his chance to impress in this first team, because he's kind of been the standout player for the under-23s over the last 2 years, but there are so many talents in there, and we've seen like Rico Lewis come to the first team largely as a result of circumstance, but there are other kind of exciting names in there, and when you've been there as long as Oscar Bob has, there's the potential that maybe you get bypassed, but he's been patient, he's held his standards, and he's now got a real opportunity, and the same goes for Oscar Bob as it does Palmer on that right wing, because Bob can play again similar to Palmer, like across the forward line or in midfield, but there is that opportunity there on the wings where City are slightly shorter on numbers to really impress, and it perfectly fits into what Guardiola wants in terms of kind of wingers coming in off the weaker on the stronger foot from the opposite wing, and the other side of Grealish really, and yeah, I thought he played very well, and I'm excited to see how he fares in the other 2 games and what kind of minutes he gets, because Guardiola has to be working towards getting his strongest team together for the Community Shield and then Burnley and things like that, but he will still want to sort of run the rule over Bob and see if he's worth keeping around as kind of a new member of the squad for this season.
Well, it was a match against Bayern Munich last summer that got kind of Rico Lewis's foot in the door. He really impressed in that cameo he got there over in America, and maybe it'll be similar on Wednesday for Oscar Bob. So that is the game, a 5-3 win for City, and an exciting one. There was one outfielder who didn't get on the pitch, but positive all the same that he was even on the bench. Kevin De Bruyne, I think there was an expectation amongst us that he's been named on the bench just because he's there and he's in the stadium. I don't think there was ever a possibility of him coming on. But the fact that he is so involved with the team, I'd say he was training on his own on Saturday before the game and an exercise bike. But the fact that he's in there, he's on the tour, it seems like he could be back before the season even starts. It seems like he doesn't seem to be walking with any sort of pain, or he's not got any crutches or anything, or whatever support you need when you've got a hamstring. So it looks like we should hopefully be back fairly soon. If not for the start of the season, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a long wait till he's back.
Yeah, it's always a bit funny, these friendlies, when basically like everyone who's turned up is named on the substitutes bench. There didn't seem to be much chance of De Bruyne coming on, but like you say, it is a positive that he was there. I would like to point you to an earlier podcast where I said don't rule anything out with De Bruyne, but I would also like you to avoid, I think, last week's podcast where I probably said he's not going to be in the squad to go on tour, because he surprised everyone by being there, and I kind of think it's important that he's there even if he's not going to play, because he is continuing his rehab and his journey back to fitness, but there is a moment at the start of the season where everyone gets back together, and with Gundogan leaving, there's an obvious space for the captaincy. De Bruyne is the longest serving player, and I think it was maybe 2 years ago after the Euros when he was injured, and he kind of wasn't around for the start of the season when City were picking their captaincy options, and he really fell down the pecking order, and you sort of wonder whether that was a bit related to him not being there, whereas this time if he's around, he is the experienced head in the group, and he can continue to sort of contribute to the squad even if he's not on the pitch for these friendlies. So it's a good sign for him and the club really that he's both on the comeback trail and he's there with the group, enjoying sort of his rehabilitation.
Absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we'll bring part 2 to a close there, and we'll also be saying goodbye to Simon, because in part 3 we'll be getting some dispatches from our man in Japan, Mr. Rich Fay, so stick around for that in part 3. But until then, see you in a moment. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Talking City podcast. And as promised, our man in Japan has joined us. A new face on these here parts, but over in the land of the rising sun is Mr. Rich Fay. Rich, new patch for you. Not a new country, you've been there quite a lot, but how are you down in Japan?
Yes, fifth time I've been here. So, everyone who's sort of the host here keeps on saying, oh, how are you enjoying your first time in Japan? And I'm like, I was here 5 weeks ago and I'm pretty sick of it, to be honest. But I don't want to be a titled journalist.
Weird flex,
no, it's lovely. Yeah, no, it's lovely. It's like, because I've got family here before that starts sounding like, I come here every year. It's because my brother lives here, I've got a nephew here. So I've been here a lot for family occasions. But yeah, it's an absolute privilege and honour, and it's been really fun, actually. It's been really, really interesting and exciting to watch this City pre-season tour so far, to be up close and personal, really, with the treble winners. We've had a sit-down with Ruben Diaz already. We've got another one with Rodri planned for tomorrow, actually, so that should come out later in the week. We've had press conferences with Pep Guardiola, and again, there'll be more of those this week as well. So yeah, it's been brilliant. It's been really hot, and there's been a hell of a lot of City fans. I've been surprised, I mean, it's the cliche that everyone gets sick and tired of, and you can go into your average attendances, you can go down the history books, and anyone who knows and actually follows Man City knows they are a massive club. And this week has proven it. Sell out at the stadium. It was annoying because the stadium, I cannot emphasize, complete sellout, apart from a row of corporate seats that they decided to put on the side the TV cameras facing. Which, why do yourself a disservice like that? Because everywhere else was sky blue, and I'd say about 80% of the stadium were had the new City shirt, and most of them had Kevin De Bruyne on the back. Kevin De Bruyne didn't play against Yokohama, so that was a bit of a kick in the teeth. But yeah, it's been brilliant, thank you. Anyone who's been following the tour diary will know about Wi-Fi issues. I was telling you before I came on there, sort of getting you updated then. Basically, the day before I flew out on tour, my old work laptop broke completely. They gave me a new one, which didn't have the Wi-Fi adapter installed. So I got to Dubai Airport on sort of the layover, trying to do some work, and there was just no Wi-Fi. It just wasn't a concept. It's like when I explained to my mum, it's just not a concept. It doesn't exist. So I had to land in Japan on the first day. I was pretty jet lagged anyway. Go to this hardware store called Bit Camera, 7th floor. Go find an Ethernet dongle, an Ethernet cable, the cheapest one I can get as well. And then I had to get this sort of makeshift setup in my hotel room. The only place that has an Ethernet cable, Ethernet port I found in Japan so far. Phone work IT a few times. The first time they fixed my Wi-Fi issue, but as soon as I turned my laptop off at the end of the day, it was gone again. So they've rectified it now, but my laptop is essentially on life support. If I turn it off, the Wi-Fi is completely gone. So it's like a really bad sort of remake of Speed, really, where I've got to keep the laptop battery as high as possible and make sure it doesn't drop into the low power mode, really, because that can be disastrous.
7% or it will explode and there'll be nightmare. Maybe not to the extent of Speed, but it certainly will make your life a lot more difficult. But you've been over there. You went to the match, of course, on Sunday. Yokohama Marinos versus City, and it ended up being. We talked to me and Si just talked about it extensively, dear listeners. But we'll get Rich's perspective since he was in the magnificent-looking Japan National Stadium, and what a game it was! A surprisingly entertaining match because, as I'm sure me and Si have touched on behind the curtain, we're recording this first. Marinos are 21 games into their season, were a lot fitter, had quite a lot of pace on the attack, and
as you and Si said,
exactly. They cut City apart on several occasions and got 2 goals from it. And it's hard. City came back to win comfortably in the end, but they were almost embarrassed. It's not like it was a thing that mattered much. It was a pre-season friendly first game back, and it was a challenging game back given the Marinos were such a fit team, and they're a part of the City group. They want to play that similar way. Kevin Muscat, the manager, believes been linked with a fair few football league jobs, and he looks to be doing a great job. And as a result, it was a really entertaining match.
Yeah, and after the game, Muscat said in his post-match press conference, basically that he could have changed their identity for a one-off match, and they could have gone defensive and tried to grind out a draw and try to frustrate City and just see how they cope defensively. But he said, look, we're 12, 13 games away from possibly another J-League title. How's that going to do us any favours? We want to play expansive attacking football. We want to work on what we've been doing anyway, and we want to work on the type of football that's going to help us get over the line in the J-League. Like both having to sort of combat teams as there's not going to be any team they face as tough as City, but facing teams that press that high and that intensely and have, City's quality in attack. And yeah, they just want to try and work on their style of play, really. So I admire what they did. And I agree with what you said there, Dan, because the running theme is you always say it's pre-season, the result doesn't matter. I do think that when you're 2-0 down in your first game back as treble winners, there is an element of embarrassment there. And if City had lost, there was other chances for Yokohama in the first half. They could have had 3 or 4. They could have got to a point where they were out of sight, and City maybe didn't have the resources or the energy, or didn't really want to risk too much to try and win it back because, it's pre-season. You don't want to exert yourself too much. It could have got to that stage. So I think it was important that City did show something in terms of a fight back, even if they hadn't have won. Of course they did, and they did it rather comfortably towards the end. The second half was, it was a parade, really. Rodri was phenomenal. Oddly, Cancelli was pretty good as well, but again, it's pre-season, so let's not get too carried away with that. Haaland's 2 goals from 3 touches. I thought Sergio Gomez was good. Luca Lewis was good, other than his role in the third goal where he sort of collided with Ortega. There was lots of little positives to take, but this probably was... We've been labelling it the easiest of City's pre-season games, but they are a team who are fully fit and already halfway through the season. So Bayern and Atletico might be bigger names, but it might be just sort of they might all be on sort of the same sort of even keel, these 3 games. So I think it is, it was fun. It was certainly not a gimme. It wasn't like City just playing some local minnows. They were playing a team who are really well respected in the region. Like we said, they've won the J League recently, 2nd in the J League at the moment. Incidentally as well, I will put this out, bring us back to attendances. We all know that they might as well be Celtic giant, don't we? There were 30,000 fans for Celtic versus Yokohama last week, which midweek, there's got to be mitigation there. There was 61, nearly 62,000 for City versus Yokohama, almost double the attendance. The growth of Man City in this region is phenomenal. And that game, it was technically a J League game, but it was the J League World Challenge Cup. It was the highest, we were told it was the highest ever J League attendance. Not sure if it was just at that stadium or in general, but the promoters were very keen for us to try and be aware of that this was, even by Japanese standards, and they are very devout fans, this was on a whole new level to anything they'd seen before. So, yes, Man City mania in Tokyo at the moment.
Well, City have visited that part of the world before. I want to say it was 2019 before COVID, wasn't it? And the growth they had, I think they played was it like the Premier League trophy, Asia trophy, something. They played like Wolves and Villa and maybe one other team, I want to say. I think like Wolves might have pulled out. It was a weirdly...
I think they played Marinus then as well.
Yeah, so they've been there before. They've been to that region of the world before, but it seems like the growth they've had in those, 4 years? And that obviously, makes sense when you get a superstar like Haaland. You've already got De Bruyne, you've got the best manager in the world, and you go and win 3 trophies. As you say, we've seen the videos and photos from yourself and other journalists out there with you. The one that blew my mind the most was like the kind of shops outside the stadium, the fan stores, just absolutely chock-a-block. Fans already wearing shirts, going to buy more and getting the scarves and whatnot. And it was, you can really tell how, what was it, like the early 2000s, United did this. They were the first kind of real team to really take advantage of the global market, the global fan base, by extending their kind of reach into Asia, Australia, America. And it seems like City, obviously couldn't do that right back then because they weren't the stature of the club they are today, but they are kind of following in those footsteps now to really take advantage of that, and kind of, it helps when you're winning stuff, but they're growing the profile exponentially with every passing tour, it seems.
Yeah, the growth will only get bigger now, you'd expect, having, like you said, won a treble, so many superstars, and so anecdotally, you can't really measure this, but I've been saying it, the estimates change every time. I've written about it this week, but the majority of fans have sort of Kevin De Bruyne shirts on. And yesterday, when they read the team news out, the loudest cheers were for De Bruyne and for Haaland. They got to see Haaland in the end, and where every time he flashed up on the big screen, he was the main man. They were getting so much excitement, but they really want to see Kevin De Bruyne. And as I'm sure we've already touched on this podcast, there is a chance we could see him at some stage during pre-season. So, yeah, things looking up for City, and for that to be the first game back, and we all know how emotionally and physically draining the end of last season was. There's signs of encouragement so far, but I do think we will all sort of, with respect to Yokohama, sort of say the tougher tests are ahead, and then you've got to hit the ground running, haven't you, in the Community Shield? So yeah, it's crucial that City do hit the ground running next season, and at the moment things looking good. And as Guardiola said, he thinks Haaland is fitter at this stage of pre-season than he was at the same stage last summer. So beware Premier League defences.
Absolutely. Well, before the Community Shield, of course, we've got two more friendlies to go over in Asia. First up is Bayern Munich on Wednesday, back at the Japan National Stadium. What are you kind of expecting from this one? Because what I was going to mention there about Marinos is that it's, obviously in terms of talent and quality, they are the least team, but they're also the team that will probably care the most about these friendlies. They've got Bayern Munich and then Atletico Madrid, who'll be treating it, I'm sure they'll want to win, I'm sure they want to do it, but they're in the same boat as City, where it's more about fitness, getting players back up to the right condition ahead of the season starting. Whereas Marinos, they were playing to win. They wanted to show what they could do on the global stage. It was City fans predominantly in the stadium, but as we could hear when Marinos scored, there was a nice helping of local supporters for their team there as well. It meant something to them, whereas the Bayern game, I can imagine it being a bit more of a low intensity. Of course, they played each other last summer in pre-season as well over in the States, and I believe that was Rico Lewis's time to shine. City won that match, but it was the game that was kind of devoured by rainstorms, if you recall, and absolute chaos. So hopefully a bit of a smoother match this time, but I don't think it'll be quite as entertaining as Sunday's match.
No, and yeah, again, I think there is a factor of the heat here. I'd mention, again, it's tedious to mention it every day, but it gets to sort of 33, 34 degrees every night, and the humidity is really quite intense. So the quality of the game probably suits to be quite a passive sort of match and not too much intensity. It's certainly got more intense on Sunday against Yokohama. But yeah, I think Bayern game will be particularly interesting. I mean, it's Thomas Tuchel against Pep Guardiola, I mean, they've had some very famous meetings in the past. I don't want to go into them too much, maybe on the City podcast. And you also think of Bayern Munich themselves. I mean, they were embarrassed. They were humiliated by City last season in the Champions League. They were torn apart. So some of those players might want to, I know it's pre-season, but they want to give a better account of themselves, really. There's the Kyle Walker element. I mean, there's the press conferences tomorrow. This is certainly a plug to follow them on Man City MEN, because I'll be there. It's Bayern up first, Thomas Muller and Thomas Tuchel speaking, and then Pep Guardiola. We don't know who he's going to be joined by just yet, but back-to-back press conferences. We'll have open training with both. Oddly enough as well, City aren't doing a mix-zone after a press conference because it's not the norm, but Bayern Munich say they are. So there could be opportunity to quiz some Bayern Munich players on what they think of Kyle Walker, what they think of João Cancelo, and what they think of facing City again. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled on the EMEA. There's a lot of stuff happening this week. And tomorrow, Tuesday, rather than UK time, that is the busiest day really of the tour so far. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled on Man City MEN, because there's got to be a lot of content coming your way.
That's awesome. It's very lovely of you to do all my kind of busy work for me. That's class. Of course, everyone, please do keep it locked on Manchester Evening News, because all the latest from Rich over in Japan and us back on the ground here in England, getting all the match coverage and whatnot out to you. But one last question for you, Rich. It's one I used to always like to ask Joe whenever he goes on his travels, and Simon watching the Blues, is what food have you been eating?
Yeah, I've gone every night. I've gone as sort of stereotypically Japanese as possible, and I've got a rule where I don't like to go. I only go to restaurants where it's like sort of only locals. I don't want to be going to sort of tourist traps. So I've got a golden rule really, where if you walk in and sort of over 10, 20% of the customers are tourists, walk straight back out. It's not a place for you really. So we've had yakiniku, which is Korean barbecue, but very popular. There's another type of food, which I'm sorry, it's basically a Japanese tapas. You order loads of little plates to your table. Ramen's been amazing. Konakatsu, which is like pork katsu. It's like deep fried, crispy pork with sticky rice and a really nice sauce. And I'm making, on Wednesday, I'm going to go for Japanese souffle pancakes again, because they are the sweet treat I love the most. But to be honest, and again, I don't want to get your violins out too much. It is so hot that I've not really had much of an appetite, because it's just like baking. You just want to sort of stay hydrated. And I mean, here's one for you. So today, I went to basically the base of Mount Fuji. Had a lovely white peach ice cream. Walked around the lake there. I think I've probably got sunstroke, so I could collapse at any moment now. Myself and Sam Lee went out on the lake in a pedalo. We went so far away that they sent a rescue speedboat to come and try and rescue us. And we had to, and he hooked himself onto our pedalo, and we had to like unhook it and be like, no, we don't want to be saved. Don't save us. It's not a mayday call. And we just had to pedal. And we pedaled in this pedalo for about 45 minutes. And I am absolutely knackered. I would not advise doing that in the bacon sun. So, yeah, that's what I ate. I had a lovely peach ice cream today.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you're getting an awful lot of play as well as your work over in Japan. I'm sure we're all very jealous. Please do not be a stranger. Come back to us later on this week after the Bayern game, and then after that Atletico Madrid game to give us more updates from Japan. Thank you very much for joining us, Rich, and thank you all very much, dear listeners, for tuning in to the latest episode of the Talking City podcast. We'll be back hopefully later this week after the Bayern game if there's enough of us on shift. If not, definitely next Monday or Tuesday after the pre-season tour is concluded. Of course, as Rich so brilliantly put, you can keep everything, keep all those eyes locked on manchestereveningnews.co.uk/Manchester City for all of Rich's updates from Japan and all the latest news that we can bring you back home in Manchester. Of course, you can get us on Twitter at ManCityMen. Facebook is Facebook. Facebook is Facebook. It's Manchester Evening News /Manchester City. We've got TikTok, which I think is Manchester Evening News Man City. YouTube, which is growing all the time. You can watch this very podcast in living colour and videos of Rich down in Japan over on YouTube at Manchester Evening News -Man City. And I think that's all we have to plug. But of course, thank you very much for listening. Give this a rate as well. I'll plug the podcast. You're already listening to it, but give us a rating. Share it with your friends. Be nice. It's nice to be nice. And after that, thank you everyone very much. We'll talk to you soon. Ta-ra.